Hello there, and welcome to the channel. Well, I hope you're having a pleasant beginning to the week. Today, I want to talk a little bit about students, especially young people, who are rich and popular. Now, I want to present a discussion I used to have with the students that would sometimes upset them greatly. I would start the discussion by saying money is just imaginary. It's not a real thing. Real things are things like trees and land and apples. Those are real things. Money is not a real thing. It's a metaphor for value. And it was invented essentially to make it easier to trade for goods and services. It's a convenience tool. It's not a real thing. And this used to upset some of my students pretty profoundly. I mean, really profoundly. I mean, they got mad. And the more I would discuss it with them, the madder they would get, because I would say things like, well, think about it. You guys don't use cash money. That you might be able to argue that, a dollar bill is a real thing. Yes, it's a real piece of paper, but you can't eat it and you can't wear it, so it may not be the valuable thing you think it is. It's our belief in its value that makes it work. And most of the money that young people deal with is little lights on a keyboard or on a screen. They're not even they're not even real things, and they don't represent real things. We're not on the gold or silver standard, either one. They don't symbolize a real thing. They're a tool of value. And for students who've said to me numerous times, I don't get poetry, when you tell them that money is poetry, it makes them mad. So, aside from the obvious reasons why a wealthy kid would be popular, new clothes, new shoes, good skin because of dermatologists and good teeth, orthodonture, there is about them something else that makes them quite appealing to others around them. And it's also a thing that wealthy people have that makes them appealing, and it's this quality of assurance. This knowledge that they don't have to be anxious about things the way people of lesser funds often have to be anxious or even embarrassed. Poverty-stricken people often are ashamed of their poverty. And that's especially true in our culture. We really don't make room for the noble poor in our culture. There are cultures that do make room for that. Certainly we ought to, because Jesus chose to be poor. He didn't have to be. He chose to be. But we don't really make room for that. And so the assurance of wealthy people often looks very much like the confidence of others. They're very similar, assurance and confidence, but they're built on different foundations. Confidence is built on a foundation of courage. And that's part of why it's so appealing. And I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more next week or the week after. But assurance is not built on courage. It's built on association. Assurance is this idea that it's going to be okay because I'm fill in the blank. I'm this person. I'm this type of person. I'm associated with this group. Now, all Americans have a tendency to have this kind of assurance. And some more than others, but essentially it was built on the idea that all Americans say, well, you have to understand, I have a right to say what I think. I have a right to go to whatever church I choose or not go to church. I have a right to be free and move about the environment without having police interfere with my movements. Now, certainly there are people that have not had that assurance as much, but they still had it for a while, for a time. But that is quickly evaporating. Whenever someone says of other people, of other humans, oh, they're vermin or they're gnats. What they're doing is saying that person isn't really a person. That person doesn't have value because they're less than a person. And that has begun to infect different parts of our environment, and that is dangerous, and I fear many of the assurances of being an American are evaporating. And if I knew what to do to stop it, I would, but I don't. So I want to talk a little bit about this idea of why it's dangerous to put your assurance, to feel your assurance is grounded on your wealth. Because let's face it, some people who are wealthy think that those who are not wealthy are less than them. That does happen. Now, not always. I have met good parents of every stripe, of every socioeconomic level, and I've met really good parents of who are quite wealthy. But one of the things that I discovered in that was that powerful and wealthy people who are good at parenting recognize that the system of rules should apply to all children regardless of their association. Now that was true almost all the time I was teaching. It was something I had to sometimes stimulate in them. And I have to explain, I taught the children of military leaders. And people who aren't familiar with military hierarchy may not know that with every promotion in the military, in the U.S. military, I don't know about other militaries, but every promotion in the U.S. military means a pay raise. And so often when people get promoted in the military, they have a party to celebrate that they're going to get paid more. And that's one of the things that happens when you meet a general. That means they've been promoted through a hierarchical rank system, and that general is paid more than the underlings, than the lieutenants and the privates and the captains. Those ranks do not earn as much. And the higher the rank, the more power around the people under them. So I've talked to wealthy parents who I had to talk to for a time, and I've talked to powerful parents, military leaders who were parents, and I had to deal with them too. So there is something there when you're talking to them. And one of the things I'll give you an example of is I had a military parent call my office one day, and the only reason he got through to me is I always answered my phone. If I was in the office, I answered the phone, even if it was my lunch hour. And I answered the phone during my lunch hour. And this man was livid about how his son was being treated. Now, I just happened to be the head of the department and not his son's teacher. But he laid into me. And I had to say, "Sir, you're going to stop talking to me that way. You are not permitted to talk to me in that way." And he calmed right down because he had gotten into the habit of talking to everybody as if they were lesser than him. And so when I took out my colonel voice, his colonel voice was sort of tamped a little bit. He apologized for talking to me the way he had. What I did also find was that there was sometimes situations where wealthy parents would call me, and I talked about this a little bit, would call me or visit with me and try to force me not to hold their child to the standard that every child was supposed to be held to as far as punishment is concerned for something that they did that they shouldn't have done. It could have been a little thing, like not turning in a paper on time, or a big thing, plagiarizing a paper. Those to me are very different acts. But regardless, what I did find, and I've said this before, was if I allowed them to talk and I asked them questions and I listened intently, that eventually they did come to the conclusion that yes, every student should have rules applied to them the same way. I've got to be honest with you. I fear that that is not the way it's going anymore. I fear that there are some very entitled and wealthy people who say to teachers, because they know they're not as well paid, I don't care what the rules are, you don't apply them to my kid. My kid gets what my kid wants. Full stop. This will always interfere with the kid's popularity. Wealthy kids who are popular only stay popular if they too suffer the consequences that regular kids do. And I'm telling you, when a wealthy kid gets excused from not suffering consequences, the kids know and they come to hate them. It doesn't matter how pretty they are, it doesn't matter how healthy they are, it doesn't matter how funny or confident or assured they are. If they don't have to follow the rules, other kids hate them. And what I would encourage any teacher to do whenever dealing with this sort of situation is to emphasize to the kids before anything happens that if somebody gets away with something, that does not engender love in their fellow human beings. It might engender envy, but it's never going to engender love. It's never going to make them popular to get away with stuff. That makes them hated. And you don't have to look far to see examples of exactly that. People who think the rules don't apply to them are not loved. So, if you want to be popular when you're rich, here's the deal. Play by the rules. I'm telling you now, you'll be more beloved if you do that. And my perfect example of this is dear old Teddy Roosevelt. When Teddy Roosevelt read an article about the difference in life between people who lived in the penthouse of the building and people who lived in the basement, he got in touch with the photographer who created the essay and said, "What can I do to help? How can I help?" Now that was lovable. That's it for today. I hope you have a glorious rest of the day, and I hope you see me soon, you gorgeous people.